much. It is special to be here. Metropolitan College was not only where my former boss worked for a while, but she met her husband, and she also met her campaign manager when she first ran for city council, Don Hazen. So between Andrew Lackman, Don Hazen, and Ruth Messinger. And then we always had a lot of students who worked in the city council office from Metropolitan. Then Audrey Cohen. So I'm very special for me to be here tonight. So thank you. The way that, in terms of the MPA and how I got where I got, but it had a lot to do with figuring out how you work in a community. And my community was the women's movement. That's what I come from. I remember the first fundraiser that I had running for city council was one that was completely women. And the work that I had done as head of a women's organization on a volunteer basis, where I had met so many friends statewide, gotten to know people around the state, was how I really got started in politics. And I've never forgotten that. And so if you ask me who are my main constituents, it's women who are active in their communities. But I also learned from working in the city council and teaching. I've been teaching at CUNY for almost 30 years now. And between the students at CUNY and the work I've done in the community, I've learned a lot about how communities operate. And I think in New York City, that's really an advantage. What makes the schools, what makes the healthcare, what makes the jobs work, what makes the housing work. And putting that all together is how I ended up, I think, both in the council, like my colleague here, and also borough president.
Well, you've had fantastic achievements, and I think since folks here are here thinking about education as a pathway to achievements of their own and on behalf of society, maybe you could comment a little bit about how your formal education, and particularly your graduate education, has fed your career.
Well, I am somebody who was very much undergrad as a returning student, like some of you, because I took time out between starting college and then finishing college, so I was a very late bloomer. And the same with grad school. I went to grad school somewhat after I had been working. And I think that's the case with some of you, where you are returning students. And the Master's in Public Administration, which I strongly urge you to get, gives you, this is what I think about. Like when I am in government and I want government to work better, which is almost every day, I think about what I learned in graduate school. And I know some of you are interested in public service, some of you are interested in business, whatever it might be, it helps. It helps to know the case studies that you learn academically. A lot of the case studies are how the Department of Motor Vehicles can run better, or how in some cases, how, God help us, McDonald's runs so well. How the private sector and the public sector in terms of cases makes a big difference. And now, and I'm always thinking about the professors and the courses, and then looking at what's in front of me and thinking back, something that we learned just triggers. It's not every single day like you might as a biochemist or some other more specific, or nursing, some more specific profession. But the wonderful professors teach you how to think about how things should run better. And I guess that's my main interest, is how to make government run better. That's why I am doing what I do. It's not so much to change the world, but I think if government works better for the people it's supposed to serve, then I've done my job. Today in 2015, we have community boards. We have 59 of them in the city, 12 in Manhattan, and we've been working hard to try to improve recruitment and then placing people on community boards. How many people have been to a community board meeting? Have some of you been to a community board meeting? Because it's like a little, I know you've been, it's like a little city hall in all the neighborhoods. And actually just thinking about graduate school, going to a community board meeting, applying to be on a community board is a good idea. But guess what? As we were interviewing 800 people, which is what we did for 300 spots, we did the MPA model. We had a case study, a real case study of a land use situation. And we asked people just like you sitting at a table right there, to try to analyze the situation. How would you deal with all the problems, the affordable housing and the waterfront and the issue with the hurricane and so on? How would you deal with that? And it all comes from the work that we've done in case studies in graduate school. you don't really know when the help is going to pop up. You know, it's obviously there's the statistics and there's the analysis and there's the metrics, and it's changed a lot since the 20 years since I've been in grad school. But it's always helpful in ways that you don't even know. You know, obviously it gives you credentials. When I hire, and we have about 60 people in our office now, I do look to see that people have a graduate degree. It helps, because you always put your situation just above somebody else who might be applying for the similar job. And of course, since you, in many cases, already have work experience, that plus the MPA really sets you apart from others. And people like me who know what an MPA means knows that you can think strategically about how to solve problems. Problem solving is important, and that's very much what an MPA teaches you.
And we have a lot of folks here tonight, I think, who are thinking about how the heck can I balance this with my job, with my family. You've watched a lot of people, I'm sure, struggle with these issues as they've come through your shop over the years, and maybe you could comment on that, because I know that's one thing that's on a lot of people's minds.
Well, the balancing of family and work is, particularly in New York City, where the cost of living is so high, housing, food, childcare, everything is high. And the only way I know how to do it is you have, at Metropolitan, I know a sympathetic faculty and staff, knowing that people are returning to school, knowing that if you have, you know, shifts of classes, I know many colleges now have different kinds of schedules, and you need to figure out what makes sense to give up so that you can finish school and manage to deal with your family and a part-time job or full-time job, which many people have. I know in our office, if people have to go to school, we have a young man now, doesn't have a family, but he is in school. We like him very much. He's in an MPA program, and he's one of the 2 students out of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds at the graduate program who's also working 2 days a week. He needs to in order to pay his rent. So we have accommodated his schedule. Not every employer will do that, but it is one way to ask. If you don't ask, you don't get. And he asked to work 2 days a week because otherwise he can't pay the rent and go to school. It's a stress on him, but it works for us because of his expertise, and it works for him. So you have to ask your employer, and you have to figure out how you give up something else in order to be able to do it. There's nothing easy, but I know Metropolitan understands your demands, and at least that's half the equation, because not every university or college does. I don't have any easy answers to that. I just know that you have to find people who will help you be flexible on literally every end, but I completely understand what the challenges are.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and I want to join me in thanking Gail for visiting with us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Born in Ukraine, raised in Bensonhurst, and all the way to city council position. How'd you do that?
Okay, all right. Mike? Sorry. Sure. Well, first of all, thank you all for hosting this wonderful event, and one more big applause for Borough President Gail Brewer, by the way. A lot of the big accomplishments we did this year was a result of the work she did in the council, so we thank her for that. So actually, my family is from Ukraine. I'm first generation American. My family came here in 1979 from a small town, small city in southern Ukraine. Both my grandmothers were in concentration camps. Both my grandfathers served in the military against the Nazis in World War II. My family left Soviet Union because they wanted religious freedom and better opportunities for their families. And so I was born 3 years later, 1982. And so I am a product of an immigrant family. I'm very proud of that. And my family came here, it's a typical immigrant story. They came here with really nothing, just a lot of luggage and dreams for their family. And my parents taught me that if you work hard, you play by the rules, and you have faith that success will be possible. So I'm a product of my public school system. I actually was a teacher myself for 8 years, very proud of that. I must say I was certainly inspired during the Bloomberg years to run for office as well, because I felt that education really we needed to really make sure that that the needs of students were being heard. And my district was one of the hardest hit districts by Superstorm Sandy as well. So when the former mayor actually went down to the opening of Coney Island beaches right after Sandy, they reopened it, and he says, "Look, Coney Island is back." And I said, "No, Mr. Mayor, we're not back until the families come back." We had hundreds of families displaced, including students in my classroom, until our library is reopened, until our schools are back to normal, and so when our housing is not damaged and with mold and whatnot. So Sandy, to me, was a game changer at many levels, and coupled with my educational background and my immigrant background, that inspired me to run and to give back to a city that gave my family every opportunity to succeed.
So you mentioned education.
Yes.
There's a lot of folks here who have had a public school education and have gone through the CUNY system and are considering going to grad school. What was your experience coming through the public school process and coming up to a couple master's degrees, right?
Yes. So I am proud to share that with the world, that I'm a product of the public school system, because we keep on taking hits in the media, but I, like many other people, are proof that we work. And so the opportunities that I had in the public school system, I think nowhere else will you have that opportunity. First of all, the diversity. My family came from Ukraine, but there were children from China, from Pakistan, from all parts of Asia, Southeast Asia. I don't think you could have that type of opportunity anywhere else really in America. It really is a melting pot, and we enjoy it. And I come from a neighborhood where Bensonhurst, Gravesend, Coney Island, they have very deep immigrant roots, and it's the latest chapter of our immigrant story. So to me, the schools are one of the first signs of a neighborhood's evolution. And I remember when I was a teacher, I looked at my school's yearbook and I went through the decades and seeing how the different graduating class and their last names and where they're from, and you get to see Italian, Jewish in the 60s to more Hispanic, African American, Chinese in the 80s, 90s, Russian, and it's beautiful to see how the city evolves and grows. And the public school system gives you that opportunity, gives you that front row view to the evolution of New York, and you make great friends. And if you really can make it, I know it's the cliche expression, if you can make it in the school system and make friends and network, you can make it anywhere. I mean, so the skills I learned in the public school system, I took with me to this day right now in government.
Now, regarding getting a master's degree.
Okay.
I came to MCNY to get a master's degree in emergency management. And I was the oldest student in every one of my classes, and I was older than every teacher in my classes. So what can you say to these folks who are thinking, uh-oh, I'm coming back to school?
First, I want to say congratulations, and you should all be very proud of yourselves, because when you look at the data about how many people actually go on to finish high school, how many go on to get an undergrad degree, how many go on to get a graduate degree, the numbers seem to dwindle as each step you move forward on. So you have already beat the so-called stereotypes. You have beat the experts who say that Americans are just or we're not advancing. So that kudos to all of you. And I know it's a lot of work and sacrifice, not just of time, but of money and resources and from family. But I think the borough president will agree with me that never before do these degrees matter this much, particularly when we're talking about issues of income inequality, finding jobs, good-paying jobs that could support a family, could support, actualizing your dreams and visions for your life. I really believe education is the equalizer, and studies show, and it's just true. The more you advance and the more you get that college degree and master's degree, you will grow. I mean, I have 2 masters, as you mentioned. My first master's was a requirement because if you're a teacher in the public school system, you need to have, that's part of the new requirement. But my second master's was my own decision. I wanted to become a school administrator, so I went back to Brooklyn College, and And actually, I credit them for helping me grow, because first of all, they do give you a pay raise, 30 above your master's, but also going back to school and becoming, taking classes that really teach you the accountability of school leaders, that really opened my eyes and helped me become a better teacher. So you grow professionally, you grow as a person, as a human being, but you're also growing financially too. I mean, so it's a win-win on many levels. So I give all of you big kudos for sacrificing, for fighting through this, and my message is, get it done. Get it done. And I'm very proud of each and every one of you.
Thanks. I'd like to go to Hurricane Sandy and kind of focus on that, since I'm representing emergency management.
Yeah.
How many of you were affected or know somebody affected by Hurricane Sandy? Okay. Now, you mentioned Coney Island. You represent a lot of communities that were dramatically affected by this storm. What's your biggest challenge right now in bringing them the help they need?
So that's a great question. And upon taking office, my biggest challenge was reminding really the world of how much has not happened since Sandy. Because since it wasn't really on the front burner, it wasn't on the front page, we went through a mayoral election, we went through an election for various offices, and so everyone was talking about, the election of Mayor Bill de Blasio and so forth. But in reality, I have a district, I have the most public housing in Brooklyn, for example, and most of my housing still have temporary boilers. And I don't know if you saw this story last year, but it became a big media story because we exposed what was not happening. So New York City Housing Authority was not really prepared for Sandy and not prepared for its impact. And after Sandy flooded all of the boiler rooms in the Coney Island buildings and the Rockaways and elsewhere, the city had a contract with these temporary boiler companies based in the South. And they brought them up here to the north, and they attached them to these buildings and to schools too, and to provide people heat and hot water. Now the problem is that we learned during the first big winter that these things were not designed for the winter. They're not designed for New York. And it was actually a resident leader in one of my buildings, in O'Dwyer Houses in Coney Island, who went downstairs and found there's a label in plain English that says, don't operate below 40 degrees. It is 0 degrees outside, snowing and icing, and they all broke down. And what did NYCHA do to try to address it? It was pretty shameful. They went to a local Home Depot and they bought a $10 electric heater to try to blow hot air at it to keep it over 40. And thousands of families had no heat, no hot water, and that became the basis of my first public hearing. I worked with the chair of the Public Housing Committee, Richie Torres, and for the first time in history, a city council hearing was held, not at City Hall, but at a public housing complex in Coney Island, right where the problem occurred. And it's very unusual. In the past, you have council hearings, the administration testifies first. My attitude was, these people have been waiting for over 1.5 years for help. The administration could wait an hour to hear them speak first. So the residents actually spoke first, while the NYCHA officials sat in the front row and listened. And they testified that they had no heat, no hot water for days, some almost for a week straight. They were using their ovens as sources of heat. We also exposed the challenge of the different languages we speak in New York City, and how NYCHA was sending these emergency people down there that didn't speak Russian, didn't speak Chinese. The community has evolved, and so I made my voice clear on that. And at the time of the hearing, FEMA had only pledged $3 million to the city, and there was a reason for that. The city was told that FEMA will not rebuild the boilers back in the basements because they'll flood again. They wanted the city to elevate them to higher ground. That's a reasonable request, but it shouldn't take 1.5 years to figure this stuff out. So for 1.5 years, everyone's just sitting on this. Well, a week after the hearing, there's a press conference by Senator Schumer and Mayor de Blasio. They didn't invite me, but that's okay. That's not what and Richie Torres also and I, we both had some thoughts about that. But the reality is they found the money. they found billions of dollars now, and now money is flowing, and they will be making repairs to the boilers, new roofs, backup generators. So there's a whole host of projects underway, but it took mobilizing the residents, it took getting the media to help us, and I also will be working very hard to make sure NYCHA has a requirement under federal dollars. Section 3 of HUD regulations require them to hire a certain number of people from low-income areas. So if there are NYCHA residents with the skills and qualifications to be a part of their own recovery work, they should be hired to do work in their own backyard. And that's something that I'll be working very hard on as well. So just to kind of sum up, I would just argue that the biggest challenge has been making sure that this remains in the front burner, making sure that we expose what residents go through in housing, what kids to this day are going through in schools with temporary boilers, because they can't be regulated. It's either piping hot or freezing cold, and how thousands of Sandy victims are still waiting for their Build It Back check and for their home to be rebuilt. So it's just about keeping the pressure on and holding government officials accountable.
Well, now you mentioned some comic relief that's not so funny, and that is Build It Back.
Oh boy.
Okay, so talk to us about the fiasco of Build It Back and programs like it in New York State and New Jersey, and what's New York City doing to come up with something better to get federal money as supplemental assistance for people trying to get back in their homes?
Well, you've asked the big question. People are still grappling with this question. So, Build It Back was really, I guess, an offshoot of former Mayor Bloomberg's rapid repairs program. Right after Sandy, they again had these emergency contracts with contractors to try to do some work in people's homes. It was really, this storm was unprecedented, right, in New York City history. But everyone said that this storm would eventually come. If you remember, before Sandy hit, you would hear messages in brochures, be ready, be ready. Turns out the government wasn't so ready for this. So Build It Back was a program that started under the Bloomberg administration. I will tell you that after a series of hearings that I've held on Build It Back, and I'll be very blunt and honest about it, that I think that the way it was structured in the beginning, the way they put it together, was very flawed. And they wasted very valuable time and precious resources in the structuring of that program. And I believe that there might have been a misinterpretation of federal regulations and guidelines. I will note that after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, the federal government exposed cases of corruption and fraud there and waste. The former mayor of New Orleans is in jail right now, I believe, because of that. So they made it more difficult to try to game the system, which I get, but at the same time, you don't want to overcomplicate it to the point you can't get people help and relief, because it's critical to help people right away and not make them go through hoops and paperwork. How many people have left their homes now? How many small businesses have already closed up shop because of the overcomplicated rules and regulations? So the way it was structured during the Bloomberg years was very complicated. They created this these bucket priorities, where if you were in bucket 1, your income was, I guess, very low, and bucket 2 wasn't so low. And meanwhile, regardless of your income level, if your home is gone, you're suffering. You've used your child's college savings accounts now to pay for the cost of moving or rebuilding or fixing up damage. People lost their life savings. People tapped into their pensions. The stories we heard during the hearings are heartbreaking. And so under Mayor de Blasio, I will say that one of the things that we called for immediately was a Sandy Czar. There are so many agencies that are involved in Sandy recovery. It is dozens of them. I can't even, Buildings Department, FDNY, DEP, so many different agencies. And I needed a point person. As the chair of a new committee that's supposed to kind of connect the dots, I needed someone from the administration side to help me connect the dots and hold them directly accountable. So we have that now. Bill Goldstein is now the mayor's senior advisor on Sandy affairs and infrastructure. They also, before I had a chance to question the former Build It Back director and to really grill them how they structured that program, that person resigned. And now we have a new Build It Back director, Amy Peterson, who I must say has been much more engaging, has done a very good job of doing outreach. She went to Coney Island with me, spent 3 hours in the rain, not complaining about the rain, and toured many of the Sandy victims and took down personal notes about their stories and their challenges. So, and what they've done was they've done away with these bucket priorities. Everyone's a priority. They've also made sure that they've moved money around because the city has some flexibility in how they move CDBG money, Community Development Block Grant money from HUD. The mayor has to file what's called an amendment, an action plan amendment to how he plans to draw down these funds. So they moved some money around. They took away some consultant projects and some stuff that I never really understood, and they put more money to housing, and we thank Senator Schumer for being a force for that. So now they claim that there is money for Build It Back, but I will say this. We began with over 22,000 applicants to Build It Back. Only about 14,000 or so are still responsive. So thousands have really stopped responding, and that is a major problem. And I am not convinced if we have enough money for every single victim. And not everyone who was eligible for the program applied. Because if you lived in a co-op, for example, you didn't realize that program was for you. People thought it was a single home repair program. But we have many co-ops in New York City that were damaged by Sandy, working families live in them, and they had no idea that that program was for them, in addition to the language barriers. So there have been improvements made, that they've gotten more checks out, but we still have a long way to go to get Build It Back fully functioning.
Mark, I want to thank you for your candor and sharing your
sure.
personal story, which should be inspirational for all of us, and thank you for your advocacy for Sandy victims.